In the 3rd century before the Common Era, the Emperor Ashoka commissioned 40 stone pillars and had them erected across the Indian subcontinent from what is now Pakistan to Bangladesh. He had each one engraved with the instructions his subjects needed to live well. Ashoka had converted to Buddhism after the Kalinga War, a war in which his own army killed roughly 100,000 people in a single campaign. He spent the rest of his reign attempting to atone, and on those 40 pillars, you will not find the phrase, "Life is suffering." You will not find a philosophy of resignation. You will not find instructions telling you to stop wanting things, stop loving people, and prepare for a better death. What you find looks far more like a public health campaign. Practical, behavioral instructions for how to live with less harm and more clarity, carved into stone and distributed across an empire. The Buddha never said life is suffering. That phrase, the one you have almost certainly heard, the one appearing in every Western summary of Buddhism, is a mistranslation, a significant one, and the difference between the real teaching and the mistranslated version is the difference between a philosophy of resignation and a technology of the mind. The Four Noble Truths are not about suffering. They are a diagnostic framework, a clinical examination of the human mind, structured exactly the way an ancient Indian physician would examine a patient. And once you see the framework for what it actually is, you stop enduring your pain and you start solving it. There is a word in Pali that makes all of this clear. We will get to that word. But first, who actually said what and where? In the Aṅguttara Nikāya, one of the oldest surviving collections of Buddhist texts, the Buddha describes himself using the vocabulary of an ancient Indian doctor. He identifies what is wrong. He identifies the cause. He determines whether the patient can recover. He prescribes the treatment. The 4-step protocol he follows was the standard clinical method of his era. Any educated person in the Ganges basin of the 5th century BCE would have recognized the structure immediately. When the Buddha stood up at Deer Park at Isipatana and addressed the 5 ascetics who had abandoned him months earlier, he was not beginning a sermon. He was beginning an examination. This is not a decree. This is not a prophecy. This is not a call to renounce your life. This is a diagnosis. And a diagnosis is the beginning of treatment, not the verdict. The first noble truth is dukkha, pronounced dukkha. You have almost certainly heard this translated as suffering. That translation is wrong. And the wrong translation changes everything. We will come back to why. For now, the important thing is what dukkha does in the framework. It is the diagnosis, the statement that something is off. And if you are honest with yourself, you already know exactly what it points to. You get the promotion and feel it for a weekend. You fall in love and spend months quietly terrified of losing the person. You have a perfect evening with people you care about and feel somewhere underneath the warmth that it will not last. And you are right. It does not last, not because you are unlucky, not because you are broken, but because you are a mind that keeps reaching for permanence in things that are inherently impermanent. and the reaching never quite lands. If you went to a doctor and he said, "Something is wrong with you," that is not a philosophy of despair. That is a diagnosis. The diagnosis is where treatment begins. In 1946, a psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl published an account of 3 years inside the Nazi concentration camps. He had lost his wife, his parents, nearly everything. And what he found: the thing that kept certain prisoners alive, when physical strength alone would not have explained it, was the ability to distinguish between the pain that was happening to them and the suffering they were adding to the pain. He called it the last of the human freedoms. We will return to Frankl near the end, but notice for now, he was describing the same distinction the Buddha had identified 2,500 years earlier. Without a lab, without a tradition of depth psychology, without any of the vocabulary we now take for granted. Now, the second noble truth. And here is where you need to see a scene. Her name was Kisa Gotami. She was young, newly married, living in the city of Savatthi. When her first child died, she did not accept it. She carried the body through the streets, going door to door, asking anyone she could find if they had medicine that could revive a child. The texts are specific about this. She walked for hours, the child in her arms, repeating the question. People pitied her. Some turned her away. Some wept with her and could not help. Finally, a merchant told her, "There is a teacher outside the city gates. He knows things that cannot be found here." The Buddha looked at her when she arrived. He said, "I know of medicine that can help. Bring me a single mustard seed from a household where no one has died." You can imagine what she must have felt in that moment. A single mustard seed. Every household in India had mustard seeds. She turned and ran. The first house, "Yes, we have mustard seeds." She asked the second question, "Has anyone here died?" The woman at the door looked at her slowly. "My husband 3 years ago." Kisa Gotami thanked her and moved on. The second house, "A grandfather last winter." The third house, "A daughter, a father, a grandmother who had lived to 90, and then stopped." By the time the light was failing, she understood what the Buddha had not said directly. There was no house. There was no mustard seed. What he had done was not refuse her. He had walked her through the second noble truth, before she had even heard its name. She was not alone. The grief she carried was not a punishment, not a curse, not a mark of special misfortune. It was the shared condition of every person behind every door she had knocked on. She put the child down at the edge of a field. She came back to the Buddha, and she asked not for medicine, but for teaching. Here is the part of the second noble truth that almost every introduction to Buddhism leaves out. The cause of dukkha is not grief itself. It is not loss. Kisa Gotami was going to grieve before she met the Buddha, and she was going to grieve after. The death of her child was not going to be undone. What the second noble truth identifies as the cause is something more specific and more workable. The Pali word is tanha, pronounced tanha. English translations reach for craving or desire. But tanha means thirst, the compulsive reflexive physical reaching of a body that cannot stop grasping for water, even when water is not available. Not a choice, a reflex. The body of craving does not ask your permission. Before it wants things, and here is the detail that changes everything. The Buddha did not say, "Stop wanting things." He tried that for 6 years after leaving his palace. He practiced the most extreme asceticism the Indian tradition offered. He ate 1 sesame seed a day, sometimes nothing for days at a stretch. His spine was visible through the skin of his stomach. He sat motionless through nights of freezing cold. The 5 ascetics practicing alongside him believed they were witnessing the greatest spiritual endeavor of their era, and at the end of 6 years, Siddhartha Gautama had a body nearly destroyed and a mind not 1 step closer to freedom. He stopped. He accepted a bowl of rice porridge from a woman named Sujata. The 5 ascetics concluded he had failed and abandoned him on the spot. He had not failed. He had found the beginning of the real answer. Tanha is not all desire. Kisa Gotami's love for her child was not tanha, the part of her that could not stop demanding the world be wrong. The insistence that the universe owed her a different outcome, the refusal to allow the reality of her child's death to be real. That was the tanha. That was the cause. That is what cycles dukkha rather than allowing it to pass through. If you are still with me, and before we go any further, subscribe if you have not yet. What comes next is the 3rd noble truth, and it contains a word that almost every English translation gets completely wrong, in a way that makes Buddhism look like a religion of extinction when it is actually the opposite. Stay with me. The 3rd noble truth is nirodha. English translations say the cessation of suffering. Cessation, which sounds to a Western ear like nothing. Extinction, the elimination of all experience. This is why many people who encounter the 4 noble truths arrive at the 3rd and conclude the Buddha is teaching you to become emotionless, to stop caring about things until you are essentially an absence. That is not what nirodha means. The word comes from a root meaning to unbind, to release what is held. Nirodha is not cutting the rope. It is untying the knot. The rope still exists. You can still pick it up, but it no longer binds you. What nirodha releases is not experience itself. It releases tanha, the thirst, not your capacity to feel, the compulsive, reflexive layer that turns feeling into cycling. Here is the test. Ask, is this a state where something is absent, or where something has been released? An empty room has nothing in it because nothing was ever brought in. A room that has been cleared has nothing in it because something was carried out. Nirodha is the clearing, not the vacancy. You bring the full capacity to feel into the cleared space. What you carry out is tanha. The Buddha, after his enlightenment, ate food. He walked, slept, talked with people he clearly cared about. He sat with dying friends. He was not empty. He was free. And the entire 3rd noble truth lives in the distance between those 2 words. This was a radical promise. In the 5th century BCE, most religious systems of the period offered you one of 2 options: endure this life and receive reward after death, or accumulate enough virtue over enough lifetimes to eventually achieve release. The Buddha was saying something different. Nirodha is a present tense possibility. The cause can be addressed in this lifetime. The prognosis is good. You can recover now. 3 of the 4 clinical steps are complete. Diagnosis dukkha caused tanha prognosis. Nirodha is possible in this lifetime for you. The final step is the prescription. The word is magga, usually translated as path. But magga in Pali does not mean a direction you have decided to go. It means a road that has already been made, a trail that exists because someone walked it before you. When the Buddha says magga, he is not gesturing at a general direction. He is saying this road is already there. Someone traveled it. You can walk it. The Eightfold Path is the prescription. It falls into 3 groups. Wisdom, how you see things. Right view, right intention. Ethics, how you act in the world. Right speech, right action, right livelihood and meditation. How you train attention. Right effort, right mindfulness. Right concentration. Each element supports the others. You cannot sustain right action without the self-awareness that comes from meditation. You cannot sustain right mindfulness without a life built on enough ethical clarity to quiet the regrets, competing for your attention. They work as a system, not a checklist. What is remarkable about the magga as a prescription is that it is entirely behavioral. It does not ask you to believe anything. You do not need to accept rebirth, a deity or a cosmology to use it. It asks you to watch how you speak, to notice when your choices create more tanha rather than less, to train the capacity to see the reaching as it forms before you have already grabbed the thing you have grabbed 1,000 times before. These are observable, testable. You can verify them in your own experience starting today. This is what Ashoka had engraved on 40 pillars and distributed across an empire, not a creed, not a profession of faith instructions. 6 weeks after his enlightenment, the texts say Siddhartha Gautama sat still under the Bodhi tree and did not move. He had found what he had found and he hesitated. This detail is easy to pass over because most accounts rush toward the famous first discourse, the beginning of everything, but the hesitation is worth staying with. He thought what I have seen is subtle. It runs against the current of the world. People are attached. People are invested in the idea that the next thing they want will finally make them well. Who will understand this deeply enough to follow through? He almost did not teach. The most consequential clinical discovery of the ancient world nearly went unshared because the physician was not certain anyone would take the prescription. Then, in the mythological framing of the texts, a figure appeared and said, "There are people with only a little dust in their eyes. Not everyone will see, but some will teach for them." Siddhartha Gautama stood up. He walked 50 miles north on foot, from Bodh Gaya to Deer Park at Isipatana, where the 5 ascetics who had abandoned him were still practicing severe austerities. They saw him approaching from a long distance and agreed among themselves, "Do not stand for him. Do not greet him. Do not treat him as a teacher. He broke his discipline. He is not trustworthy. But as he got closer, something shifted in all 5 of them. They stood. They greeted him. They took his bowl, brought water, prepared a seat. And he sat down and gave what the texts call the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, not the discourse on suffering. The setting of the wheel of the Dhamma in motion. Viktor Frankl wrote in 1946 that the prisoners who survived longest in the camps were not always the physically strongest. They were the ones who could hold on to meaning, who had found a way to work within conditions. They could not change, rather than being crushed by the demand that things be otherwise. He called it the will to meaning. He described the ability to choose your response to your circumstances, even when you cannot choose your circumstances themselves. As the last of the human freedoms, he built an entire school of psychotherapy on the distinction between unavoidable pain and the suffering that comes from insisting things be different from what they are. He had no access to the Pali canon. He arrived at the same distinction the second and third noble truths are making. The same distinctions Kissa Gautami walk through door by door in the streets of Savatthi, when 2 completely different systems arrive at the same answer independently, 2,500 years apart, in entirely different cultural contexts, by entirely different methods. That answer is worth taking seriously. The 4 noble truths do not say life is suffering. They do not say your existence is a punishment. They do not say the goal is to become empty. They say, here is what is happening. Here is the specific cause. Here is the evidence that the cause can be addressed. And here is the method. 4 steps in order. From a physician certain enough of the treatment to walk 50 miles barefoot to deliver it. 3 things worth carrying from this. First, what the teaching actually says. Dukkha is not suffering in the sense of agony or misery. The word was originally an engineering term. It described a wheel whose axle hole was slightly off-center, not broken, not destroyed, just a wobble. The diagnosis is not, your life is terrible and you should resign yourself to it. The diagnosis is, something is structurally off in how you are relating to experience, a different statement entirely, and a much more treatable one. Second, how to use this right now, the next time you feel the wobble. The restlessness on a good day, the unease without a clear source, the reaching for something, and not quite finding it. Try applying the framework. Name it, this is dukkha. Then find the tanha. What is the demand underneath the feeling? What is the part of you that is insisting the world be different from what it currently is? You do not have to eliminate the first layer. The difficulty will come regardless. But you can work with the second layer. That is what the magga is for. And third, this is the one that changes how you see yourself. You are not someone who has been told that life is suffering and should be endured with grim spiritual fortitude. You are not being asked to lower your expectations until nothing disappoints you. You have been given a diagnostic framework, a prognosis that recovery is available in this lifetime, and a working prescription that requires you to believe nothing. You cannot verify yourself. The wheel can stop wobbling, not because you stop feeling, because you learn what makes it wobble. You are not a patient who has been told to accept an illness. You are a patient who has been given the cure. Before you leave, a genuine question for the comments. Of the Four Noble Truths, which one surprised you most when you heard it? Explained this way, and which one do you find hardest to actually apply in your own life? Leave that below. It genuinely shapes what this channel makes next. If this was useful, subscribe. The next video goes where the Four Noble Truths naturally lead, what the Buddha actually meant by the word karma, and that too is not what you have been told. The Four Noble Truths are not about suffering, they are about the end of it.